If not De'Aaron Fox today, how do the Jazz do De'Aaron Fox of the future? It's next on Locked on Jazz. Bum 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 pow.
You are Locked on Jazz, your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz. Part of the Locked on Podcast Network. Your team every day.
How are you? I am David Locke, radio voice of the Utah Jazz, Jazz NBA insider. This is Locked on Jazz. It is your daily podcast on the Utah Jazz, giving you insight, expertise, geeky numbers, and hopefully making it way better to be a Jazz fan each and every day. Thank you so much for making Locked on Jazz your first listen of the day. We are free and available on all podcasting apps and on YouTube, and we have the free daily newsletter for you as well. On today's show, late game watches doubling up on the Houston Rockets. They're the most fascinating team in the league, and interesting to look at their path of where they are now for us in this situation. 10-game blocks of progress. Isaiah Collier certainly getting better. And we'll start off with, if not De'Aaron Fox now, then how De'Aaron Fox or that type in the future. That is what's coming up on today's edition of Locked on Jazz. Today's show is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. To the everydayers out there, you are the best. Thank you for being a part of the show. Bombshell across the NBA that we kind of knew was coming, but maybe thought it quieted, that De'Aaron Fox wants traded out. Let me rephrase that. The report was that the Sacramento Kings are open to trading De'Aaron Fox. And I think that is that De'Aaron Fox has basically said, I'm not re-signing in Sacramento. I'm done, and I want out. At least that's my opinion. I can't figure out why else you would trade De'Aaron Fox. Part two of the report was that his best or most wanted destination is San Antonio. What's interesting to me about this from a Utah Jazz perspective is twofold. One, could we get involved? Should the front office be involved in De'Aaron Fox today? And if the answer is yes, well, the fact is the Jazz probably have a better package that they can put together than the San Antonio Spurs can. But the problem is that De'Aaron Fox wouldn't re-sign with the Utah Jazz right now either. And this lies a big issue for the Jazz moving forward. And that is, if we can't do De'Aaron Fox today, how can we ever do De'Aaron Fox in the future? The Jazz could trade for De'Aaron Fox. It's $34 million. The Jazz could put together a package of Colin Sexton, Jordan Clarkson, just off the top of my head with our numbers, Jordan Clarkson, and a plethora of draft picks and get it done. The Jazz could send them, if they wanted to be good right now, the Jazz could send them John Collins and Colin Sexton and probably take Trey Lyles in the deal, and the deal gets done, and a ton of draft picks. And Sacramento can try to still be good and have all these future draft picks and be in an interesting situation. So the Jazz could certainly get the deal done. And the fact is the Jazz have better draft capital to offer probably than the San Antonio Spurs do. So we sit here today, I think if you put the package on the table and Sacramento was able to make a deal and De'Aaron Fox was under a 10-year contract where he could never leave a deal, the Jazz could get a deal done for De'Aaron Fox. But the Jazz can't do a deal for De'Aaron Fox right now because De'Aaron Fox isn't going to re-sign in Utah. And so how do we get to a point where the Utah Jazz are at a status symbol that they can actually trade for an NBA player like the next De'Aaron Fox? And this is a little bit of, I think, what Danny has been trying to put the Jazz in a position to be, is that let's not empty every cupboard on the planet and lose every player imaginable, because when a player does become open that we can trade for, we need to have something around them to make it appealing, right? If we were to trade all of Lowry Market and all of our players to go get someone right now of De'Aaron Fox, we don't have another piece, and De'Aaron Fox is going to play out his $37 million next year, and he's going to jettison and he's not going to have any issue. He's not going to have any interest in signing, right? What's interesting here is the San Antonio Spurs have some legacy because of the fact, and De'Aaron Fox is from Texas, because of the fact they have Tim Duncan and David Robinson, and they have titles. On the other hand, they've been pretty terrible, but they got Victor, and the whole Victor piece is what makes them appealing. So, in some extent, they're kind of 2-year tank of 22-60 and 22-60 and 34-48 and 33-39 are kind of their 5-year tank, frankly, of what they've been on gets worth it because of the fact that they go get Victor Wembanyama, and that changes the whole complex. But I don't think De'Aaron Fox 4 years ago is willing to go to San Antonio with DeJounte Murray, and very similar to where the Jazz were for 3 or 4 years there, where they kind of just had a DeMar DeRozan and had enough talent to be, but not enough talent to really tank, and then they went to 22-60 and got lucky. The other team whose name is going to come up in this process is Houston. We're going to talk about Houston a lot today. They're the most intriguing team in the league right now to me because I late game watched them. But Houston's interesting. I think Houston's probably appealing to De'Aaron Fox right now. And I'm certain that Houston, with a lot of draft capital, is going to sniff around on De'Aaron Fox and figure out whether De'Aaron Fox complements what they have. And they're pretty good right now. And they've got some pieces. But they certainly weren't appealing 3 years ago. So they've come out of the backside of their 3-year rebuild of 17-55, 20-62, and 22-60. And all of a sudden, they're 2 years later, after going 500 for a year, they're 32-14. They're in an awesome city for NBA players. They're in Texas for taxes. De'Aaron Fox is from Texas, and they're 32-14, and they're probably appealing. So a little bit of this from a Jazz standpoint is, can we get there eventually? 3 or 4 years from now, if we go through this process and we suddenly have our versions of Jalen Green, Jabari Smith, Amen Thompson, and have added some players to go with it, are we, even though we're in Salt Lake City, Utah, can we become appealing also? If we get lucky, and I don't even want to say the word, and get this year's version of Victor Wembanyama, are we somehow appealing? Can we be in it for the next De'Aaron Fox? But we can't be in it for De'Aaron Fox right now. The same way Houston couldn't be in it for De'Aaron Fox 3 years ago, probably. And San Antonio couldn't, but they're probably two of the teams right now that can be. And I think the question also gets a little interesting is, they're really, really good right now. But would Oklahoma City be an appealing spot for you? Because it's not appealing on any level for anything ever, other than the fact they're going to win 60 basketball games. This trade wouldn't happen, but would De'Aaron Fox be all right with Darius Garland for De'Aaron Fox, and that he goes to Cleveland right now? Because Cleveland's not appealing for anything, but they're 37-9. Now, Fox supposedly said he's not interested in going to Chicago because they're not winning enough, and that's a pretty great city. He also doesn't like the cold. Sorry. You get to choose at this point, though, I guess. So to me, that's what's interesting. Now, how do we do it is the question. One approach is you've got to keep some pretty good players on your roster so that when the next De'Aaron Fox becomes available, you have enough things to put around him that you can sell to De'Aaron Fox. Hey, it's worth coming here. We're going to win right away. We've made this trade. We have these pieces. We traded. We have enough pieces, and let's go. And now we become the next Cleveland after they did their losing. Or the next Houston, the next San Antonio immediately. The other approach is that, you're not going to be able to be that person, that team for 4 or 5 years. Houston's 5 years in, San Antonio's 5 years in, Cleveland's 5 years in. That actually, for the next 3 or 4 years, you're actually not going to be that appealing. There's zero chance that a player with a year and a half left on a contract is going to be willing to be traded to Utah and re-sign a contract for the next 4 or 5 years until we prove that we've got a team that's exciting and fun and you want to be a part of it, you want to make that growth. And that's a place you're suddenly willing to live. And so we might as well not have those pieces around because it's 4 or 5 years from now we need those pieces. And right now they don't actually help. That even if you're trying to make the trade so that you have the cupboard's not bare, it's actually not possible for the Jazz to make that trade for another 3 years. That's the decision the Jazz front office kind of has to make. Is do they think they really can get into play on the next De'Aaron Fox immediately? In which case, then, yeah, you probably do want to try to keep some decent players around, have it be somewhat ready to push go. Or is the reality the same way Houston and San Antonio and everybody else couldn't have signed for De'Aaron Fox at any point in the last 3 or 4 years, but can today, that we're 3 or 4 years out of being able to be available to De'Aaron Fox? Or there's the third version, which is that Salt Lake City, Utah simply will never be that. The same way that for whatever reason, Chicago just wasn't to De'Aaron Fox, or Detroit's not to De'Aaron Fox. And therefore, you better just build it through the draft, hold those guys, and try to get that process. But the teams that have done that, Boston, had good players around Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum. So it'll be interesting to see Houston's doing it a little differently. All right, let's look at 10-game patterns. Isaiah Collier is certainly getting a lot better, and that's exciting for Jazz fans. Next on Locked on Jazz. Wednesday edition of Locked on Jazz is brought to you by Intercap Lending and our good friend Steve Carter. Steve Carter is Locked On's own personal loan officer for you if you need a loan right now. And what's super cool about that is that Steve Carter's awesome. Intercap Lending is a flexible kind of new way of doing. It's not new. It's actually probably like old school. They're shaking up the home loan world by making it accessible, straightforward, and personal, which is probably like in our dream what 1950 was. Whether you're buying your first home, refinancing, or exploring options as a veteran, Intercap is there for you. Steve Carter is our own personal dedicated loan officer. Intercap actually still holds most of their own loans, so their underwriting times are 24 hours, where most banks are 4 to 7 just to get a decision, 4 to 7 days to get a decision from an underwriter. They're still servicing 60% of their own loans in-house right now. Steve Carter is our own personal loan officer. I can run through all the reviews, whether it's from Matthew Peterson, who said Steve absolutely goes above and beyond, makes your experience as easy and enjoyable as possible. We were relocating to Oklahoma. Steve wasn't licensed in Oklahoma, so he went and got licensed to service our loan. He kept on top and communicated each and every step. I was undoubtedly recommend Steve to anyone who might be looking for a home loan. That sums it up right there. Ben Rickards, right? Steve was very helping in securing my mortgage, very reasonable at all big or small questions, and responsible and reactionary to everything I needed. Do recommend. Steve is the best in the business, said SR, and I don't think we would have our home if it was not for him. So email me at dlock09@gmail.com. That's dlock09@gmail.com. We'll set you up with Steve Carter for your own personal loan officer. Today's show is brought to you as well by Game Time. Download the ticketing app right now, Game Time, and get in business for the upcoming event, concert, whatever it is you might want to attend. Game Time is there for you. I love Game Time for various reasons. You toggle the on to the all-in pricing, and you're not surprised. There's nothing that's going to come up and surprise you. I love Game Time because it gives me the seat view. And Game Time now has the new feature called Game Time Picks, which makes getting tickets for events even easier. Filters out the fluff and shows you incredible deals on great prices. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Create an account, redeem your code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. Thanks so much for making Locked on Jazz your first listen of the day. We are free and available on all podcasting apps. We have the ultimate one-stop NBA newsletter for you. Katie Heindel wrote a big article this week about what's wrong with the Phoenix Suns. Mid-season reports on the national articles. She's got another one coming out today. I haven't seen it yet. Pretty excited. Thursday, Mike Schreier writes for it, so you get an exclusive national article. Josh Lloyd gives you the fantasy tips, so you get a Jazz breakdown. Today, you get exclusive Emptying the Noggin. My thoughts after every game, just kind of put out in bullet point form. Last night, written on the plane. Didn't fall asleep on my computer. Get it at LockedOnDaily.com. Locked on Jazz. Thanks so much. We have the best open rate of any show. We've fallen behind Sacramento. We've had a lot of news in Toronto, but we're doing great. So thank you for subscribing. We have a tendency right now to look at each of these guys on a day-by-day basis. I can't blame you, right? Like, how did Keyonte deal? I mean, last night, Keyonte had as bad a 3-minute stretch of basketball as you can possibly imagine, and then turned it around and battled the night. And so you can look at the night. But let's look at 10-game stretches for Isaiah Collier. He's only played in 37 games, so they're not complete. But this is pretty interesting. His first 10 games, Isaiah Collier shot 37% from the field and 7% from three, and was playing 18 minutes a night. He had 3 assists. He kind of been to the free throw line a few times. He was pretty feckless overall. Then we look at his next 10 games, which was, we'll call it from the 18th game, or his 11th game was 20th, was 18th to 28th. And he actually got worse. He shot 24% and 21% from three. He went down to 15 minutes a night, and he was really unplayable at that point. He was still getting his 3 assists a game. Somewhere along the route here, he ends up going to the G League, and I think gains a little confidence. And then we look at his games 21 through 30, and you begin to see a nice upward tick by Collier. Now, all of a sudden, he's playing 26 minutes a night. So very subtly, he goes from 18 down to 15, up to 26. Okay, well, now you're playing. His shooting percentage gets better, 41% and 26% from three. He jumps to 6 assists a game. And now we look at the last 7. And again, we don't have the final 10-game stretch here. That would be nice to have to make this nice and round. But he's shooting very similar. He's at 42%, 27% from three. He's up to 31 minutes a night and 8 assists. So his shooting is really kind of held there at 41, 42%. Not great. 26% from three. Not great. But his minutes have gone from 26 to 31, and his assists are up to 8 a game. It's a nice way to kind of look at someone like Isaiah Collier, try to see what's going on. And then, frankly, we back this up to his last 17 games. If you break his season into 2 halves instead, and so you look at his 16, 17, you would probably 37 divided by 2 is 18, 17.5. So if you look at his last 18 games, he's playing 27 minutes a night. He's shooting 41% from the field, 26% from three, which is not good enough. But he has the 7 assists, and he has this 8 points a game, and he's kind of become what he is right now. He's getting just a little bit better every night. The 3-point shooting is going to be an issue. He has figured out he can't finish at the rim very well, so he's backed it out, makes some floaters, which also means he doesn't go to the free throw line, so he's going to have to figure that out. Like, so many things to learn, but you can actually literally look at those numbers I just showed you and see them beginning to kind of grow in that stretch. And those are trending in the right direction, because there's some other players where you can look at and be like, oh gosh, the league's figuring him out. Like Filipowski got his spin again last night for the first time in about a week or about a month. And, it looked okay. Filipowski's played 35 games, so we really need to break him up. And he's got all sorts of injuries and this and that. So his is weird. If we break it up into 3-11 game or 3-11 or 12 game stretches on him for the year, it actually gets a little funky because he has like an injury and time off, and they don't gap nearly as well for him as he kind of continues to try to get time and figure it out. And he's had some weird shooting stretches where he finds the range for a day. I mean, he had a stretch where I think he missed like 11 in a row, and then he'll go hit 2 of them, and the above the break 3 has been a problem. Then he'll bury that. You think it's kind of coming back around. And his minutes have kind of been all over the map as well so far this year. And some of his numbers go the kind of opposite direction, though. He's had double figures now, scoring in 3 of the last 4, and he's just such a good rebounder with that big 17-point rebounding night for Kyle. And Kyle, remember, got the minutes earlier in the year for everyone. But it's an interesting way, I think, if you're trying to look at how our rookies, or even you can do the same thing a little bit with Keyonte, I think, and try to look at it rather than going night by night. And I get it. Like, I know why I'm doing it too, right? Like, you just every night wondering and judging and trying to figure it out and trying to guess and do all those kind of things. Frankly, Keyonte, I think, is getting so much spotlight because he got taken out of the lineup. On the other one, the one that like we just can't ignore anymore is that we're now 110 games into Keontae's career, and his shooting percentage in year 1 is the exact same as year 2. Like, and I had said earlier this year that like I wanted to give him more space when he had the bad 8-game stretch, and certainly I still do. But he has not found a way to avoid the nights where he shoots below 30% from the field. And, and that's why it's probably good to look at him at a 10-game stretch. But suddenly, in 4 of his last 5 games, he has shot 30% or below from the field. Like somehow that has to try to, go away. Keyonte's got, played 35 games also. So you would do kind of the same thing with Flip, and you'd end up in the same process where, Keyonte plays the first 12, 13 games of the season. The second, then his latest stints got 4 or 5 inactive stretches in there that make it hard. Back up on Flip, by the way, 8 points, 5 rebounds a game at 18 minutes a night to start the year, which was really kind of an exciting stretch. 56, 39 from 3. Like that was golden. And then the league scouted him, which is what's so incredible about this league, is that the league kind of came out and said, okay, well, here's your next 12 or 13 games. And suddenly he went to 46% from the field and 19% from 3. Go back to that Clippers game. He scored 5 points in 4 minutes. He still played 17 minutes. He just suddenly became about half as effective when the league kind of said, oh, okay, you actually matter. We're going to pay attention to you and see what you're doing and what you're not. And in the last 10 games, he's back up to 22 minutes a night. So a nice jump from 17. That's good to see. He's 45% from the field, 29% from 3. But again, little less effectiveness, 7 points and 6 rebounds, right about where he was to start the year. So he's kind of bouncing. You see it like, so opening 10, scouting report, next 10, kind of a nice uptick there for Filipowski in the process that we're watching take place. If you do it for Key this year, he opens the year, obviously, with that terrible stretch of shooting. We'll just look at his shooting numbers, 35, 31 to start the year, 35% from the floor and 31% from 3, which was really a tough stretch. And we're going to look at Key in the stretch of, in a stretch of 3 sets of games, and it's not going to come out that evenly. But if you look at before his injury, he's kind of upticked it really impressively. He's gone from 35% shooting to 43% shooting and 39% from 3, and it feels great. Like, oh, this is it. Key's figured it out. We don't have to worry about that opening stretch. These are numbers that are really viable. 43% from the field, 39% from 3. That 10-game, 12-game stretch right there is anything any Jazz fan needs or wants to see out of Key. They should be very pleased about it. And then we have this final stretch where he's come back from the 2 different injuries, and now he's right back to where he was to start the year at 36% for the field and 30% from 3. So can he regain whatever rhythm he had in the middle there? Probably the right way to look at him in 10-game stretches is that middle one. Where do we regain that for Key this season? So it's kind of a good way, I think, to look at it, because we are into this weird world where we're checking, we don't have a lot else to watch. We're looking at development night in and night out, and you can kind of go on this wild roller coaster. The Houston Rockets are the most interesting team in the NBA right now, and we late game them, watch them twice. It's next on Locked On Jazz. So the Houston Rockets, who I think are important to us, because as we go through this season and wonder what the dividend is, the Houston Rockets went and did this. They went 17-55. They went 20-62. They went 22-60. And for those 3 years, they were left with Jalen Green, Jabari Smith, and Amen Thompson. And now the Houston Rockets are 32-14. We talked about it yesterday. They're grabbing 40% of all of their offensive rebounds. Jabari Smith has been out with a hand injury, so we have not seen him. But Jalen Green, now 4 years in, is averaging 17 points a game, shooting 43%, 35% from 3. And watching the Celtics game the other night late, I mean, he comes off a pick and roll now with such confidence and such control, snaking underneath it, and has a burst that is just world class. You just don't get that burst with it if you're not picking second in an NBA draft. It's just that good. And Amen Thompson might be their best player. I know they have Alfred Şengün, and I know they have Jalen Green, but Amen Thompson might be their best player. He is dominating basketball games. Against Cleveland a few weeks ago, Donovan wanted no part of it. Against Boston the other night, he was incredible against Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown, and Jason Tatum was awesome late in that game. And last night, he suffocated Trae Young. Defensively, he's amazing. Offensively against Cleveland the other night, he had 9 offensive rebounds. The next night he had 4. By the way, their last 4 games, they beat Cleveland twice, Boston, and then beat Atlanta last night on the back end of a back-to-back. He still can't shoot, but he's shooting 56% from the field, and I cannot explain how impactful he is in the game. And you don't get Amon Thompson unless you're drafting 4th in the draft at 6'7", 210. Jalen Green and Amon Thompson made plays in every game I watched that you just don't get unless you're picking in the top 4 of an NBA draft. Like that's their athleticism and play is elite and incredible right now. And the offensive rebounding numbers are crazy and they're good. Their late game action is a little questionable. They're still running a lot like against Boston, which was an incredible game. They end up beating Boston the other night in 114-112 in Boston. Last night, they're up 16 against Atlanta and completely collapse. And they do this a little bit. They're a bunch of fairly inefficient shooters, and then somebody goes off. Dylan Brooks went off against Boston and had 36 and hit 10 threes, and that's why they won that game. So it's a pretty unnatural way for them to win that game. But in the fourth quarter, they made a ton of plays. They do some really interesting things. So they play Şengün in the post with Thompson on the dunker on the other side, and then the other guys spaced who aren't great shooters. But if the ball if you go into Şengün in the post, you double, and he starts to move the ball around, it gets interesting. Eventually, you end up having to leave Thompson, then he's available underneath the rim. But Green, Brooks, Van Vliet are not great shooters. The other one, that because Green is so dynamic, teams will hedge on the pick and roll with Şengün, and then they're getting Şengün in the middle of the floor conducting, and that's when they're pretty good. They're not running everything through Şengün like they did a year ago. They're showing some more versatility, and because they don't have a go-to guy, what's interesting to me in watching them in 4 straight close games, or Cleveland, Boston, Atlanta games, they're able to play they go after the pigeon. So last night, they played a lot more pick and roll to get Trae Young involved late in the game. The night before, Boston doesn't really have that guy. And so maybe it's Porzingis they pulled out on the floor once or twice, but they don't really have that guy. So first of all, Dylan Brooks went nuts. The second thing is Amon Thompson just made a bunch of plays. They also are grabbing an key offensive rebound at some point in the game every night. And so their pure athleticism is just making plays. I'm not, if I'm looking at them and saying to myself, is that a championship team? I'm kind of holding to where I was earlier that both Memphis and Houston late in games bother me. But at some point, Houston's won more clutch games than any other team in the NBA right now. They're 17-9 in clutch games. Their offense is not good. It's middle of the pack, and their defense is 8th. So some of this might be luck, but they're also just making enough plays at the right time that they need to, particularly on the offensive glass. They're grabbing a bunch of offensive rebounds. They're not actually a great defensive rebounding team in late games when they start getting crushed because Şengün's so small. So they have all sorts of little warts, but they just kind of make plays, balls bounce, and it jumps back to me a little bit. Just they have this unbridled, pure athleticism of their guys on the floor. They also play incredibly hard. So, a little bit also on Houston, I would say the idea that their culture got ruined by tanking is certainly not true. If you watch them right now, they play awfully hard. The fact that they only won 60 games in 3 years. It might have slowed down Jalen Green's development, and they almost traded him last year. He's pretty darn good. And Amon Thompson's pretty darn good. And Jabari Smith, we just haven't seen in a little while because of the hand injury. I think he'll probably turn out to be a huge part of what they're doing too. He's a really terrific shooter, and if he develops some other skills, but they're fascinating, I guess, is what I'm telling you. And the big takeaway of them, if we're late game watching, to me, is that they're winning games with athleticism that you don't get anywhere but the top of the draft. When I watch them right now, they fly around the court. Their defensive rotations are sick. Their closing speed is amazing. Their offensive rebounding is relentless. And how do you do that? You get elite athletic talent. And the only ways you do that is to be able to do it by drafting at the front of the draft. That is Locked On Jazz today. Thanks very much. Hope you're doing great. It is newsletter sign up, please. DLock09 on social. If you want to grab you on any of those, or subscribe or follow the show, 5-star reviews. I appreciate it. Hit the bell button on YouTube. We now send you the first ever 24/7 national sports channel, Locked On Sports today. Actually, we're going to send you Locked On NBA. I'm going to send you Locked On NBA. Have a good one. See you.